You've heard of the stories of mass murderers, the John Wayne Gacy's and the David Koresh's and those. You've heard of those things, but when it hits home, there's a different sound. How could this happen?
I could hear him locking the door. He came from behind. He had a knife this long, and then put it up under here. And I'm like, oh, Lord. After maybe a total of 2 or 3 days, if I had to guess, because it seemed like eternity. His words to me was, say your prayers. I'm gonna feed you, then I'm gonna kill you.
In the early 2000s, the Mount Pleasant neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, was plagued by a terrible smell for 2 years. Many people thought a nearby sausage shop was the source of the odor, but the true culprit was Anthony Sowell. Between 2007 and 2009, Anthony committed horrifying crimes, including attacking and killing 11 women. He concealed their bodies in his home and backyard, causing the smell of decomposition to spread, which made neighbors believe there was a sewer problem or spoiled meat at a neighboring sausage shop. The truth came to light when one of Anthony's victims managed to escape and share her terrifying ordeal with the authorities. This courageous act led to the capture of the killer. The subsequent investigation revealed a gruesome story.
Once I'm back through the window, I see he's still asleep. He looked like the devil.
What may have happened is that, she had her guard down because she expected to chill and relax and have a good time.
In September 22, 2009, a woman named Latundra Billups found herself lured into the residence of Anthony Sowell under the false promise of narcotics. But what unfolded inside those walls was a harrowing nightmare. After they indulged in alcohol and narcotics, and as Latundra was relaxed, her guard completely down, Anthony struck.
Bam. He would change. His demeanor would change.
Anthony Sowell ended up brutally attacking her, tying an electrical cord around her neck until she lost consciousness. But by some miracle, Latundra found herself waking up. Realizing that she was still in her captor's home, she knew what she needed to do if she were to survive this horrific ordeal. She knew she would have to find a way into Anthony's head and convince him she was a harmless woman who just wanted to go home. Latundra began to speak to Anthony, appealing to whatever good that was left inside his dark heart. She did anything he asked, made herself look and act as non-threatening as possible, so Anthony would believe her when she pleaded with him to let her go. Latundra closed her eyes and prayed to God, desperately pleading that Anthony would let her go, and somehow he did. As Latundra escaped Anthony's trap, she ran as far as her legs would carry her. She wanted to go to the authorities to report what happened to her, but for some reason, she didn't. It may have been because she was terrified due to the narcotics in her system or the threats Anthony had issued, leaving her trapped in silence. Exactly 1 month later, on October 20th, Sean Morris, another unsuspecting victim, walked into Anthony Sowell's home. Like his previous victim, he had lured Sean Morris in under the pretense of indulging in drink and narcotics. She met him at a bus stop where she was drinking beer with a friend in the early morning hours of Oct. 2009. Anthony invited her to his house to continue drinking and smoking. The woman accepted, and they walked to his home several blocks away. But unlike his previous victims, after they indulged in drugs and narcotics, Anthony let her go. It is unclear at this point why Anthony chose not to attack her, but her initially clean exit would soon take a sinister turn, as it appeared destiny had scripted a far darker tale for Sean. As she made her way out of Anthony's house and turned in the direction of her home, Sean realized she had forgotten her ID at his home. What she didn't know, as she turned back and headed back to Anthony's home, was the horrifying fate that awaited her.
Like I was I just don't remember. It's like two of me or something. I just don't know. That part is missing.
When she got to his home for the second time that night, Anthony unleashed a horrific attack on her. The intensity of the situation reached its peak as Sean's desperate need to escape forced her to fall from a third-story window. The alarmed witnesses in neighboring homes swiftly dialed 911, their voices trembling as they reported the chilling spectacle of a naked woman jumping from Anthony's home. Sean also chose to remain silent, refusing to talk to the police about what she had gone through at the hands of Anthony Sowell. And to make matters worse, by the time the officers arrived at Anthony's home due to the neighbor's call, Anthony had vanished, so the officers had nothing to work with. It was a race against time. But thankfully, at this point, Latundra had worked up the courage to report Anthony the following week. Had she not been brave enough to speak about the horrors she had endured at the hands of Anthony, his reign of terror might have continued unchecked. However, her report, along with Sean's harrowing encounter, provided the authorities with the leverage they needed to secure a warrant to search Anthony's house. What they found inside on October 29th would stay with them forever. The suspense was thick as they entered the dwelling on October 29th. The putrid scent hit investigators first, and years of experience in the police force told them something awful had happened there. Their hearts raced as they made their way into Anthony's basement, where they discovered the bodies of 2 women. Their grim discovery didn't end there. As their search proceeded, they uncovered 4 more bodies, concealed in crawl spaces, 4 others buried in the backyard, and a bone-chilling find, a woman's skull concealed in a paper bag hidden inside a bucket. In total, they unearthed the partial remains of 11 women. At the time of the search, Anthony Sowell was absent, but the law eventually caught up with him, leading to his arrest on October 31st, 2009. The true extent of Anthony's spine-chilling crimes would slowly unravel during his highly publicized trial, sending shockwaves through the community. 2 days before Halloween in 2009, Cleveland police stepped into an actual house of horrors. In and around the otherwise indistinct 3-story dwelling in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, officers discovered the decomposing remains of victims whose lives had been cruelly cut short over 2 years. The entire community was shocked and racked with questions. What kind of person would do something so horrific and why? Anthony Edward Sowell entered this world on August 19, 1959, but he was far from the only child in his family. In a bustling household, he had to contend with 7 siblings for attention. These were his early days. Growing up in East Cleveland, Ohio, and young Anthony found himself in a constant battle for the affection of his mother, Claudia Garrison, who went by Gertrude. As if competing with 6 siblings wasn't challenging enough, his trials were far from over. Just a few years later, his older sister succumbed to a chronic illness, and her 7 children joined the already crowded household. This influx of family members made Anthony's quest for his mother's love and attention even more daunting, setting the stage for a turbulent journey ahead. Gertrude found herself burdened as a single parent to 13 children, most of whom weren't even her own. Whether it was the overwhelming stress of this responsibility that unleashed her dark tendencies, or if it had always lurked within her, remained a mystery. But what was about to unfold would set in motion a series of events that would transform Anthony from an innocent child to a sadistic killer. For young Anthony, there was nothing more vital than earning his mother's love in his mind. Unfortunately for the nieces and nephews who came to live with them, the path to Anthony's mother's affection took a sinister turn, one paved with violence. Behind the facade of a seemingly loving and diligent single parent, Gertrude has a deep, sadistic side.
Sowell saw his nieces and nephews beaten by his mother and grandmother, and that left a lasting impact.
This dark side of her personality would reveal itself in the cruel treatment of the new children under her care. Leona Davis, one of the victims, would later recount the horror, describing how she and her siblings were subjected to regular physical violence while residing in the household. As time went on and the children grew up, the true extent of Gertrude's wickedness became increasingly obvious. At first, the chilling pattern took shape. The children would be first to disrobe, after which they would be severely. One question looming over everyone who came across this case: what could possibly have happened along the way to lead Gertrude to unleash such cruelty on her grandchildren? Could it have been a psychological breakdown brought on by the stress of raising 13 children? Or could it have been that she held some deep-seated hate for the grandchildren, blaming them for the death of her daughter? Or maybe it was something far sinister. Could it be that that side of her has always been lurking underneath, waiting for the perfect time to reveal itself? Is it possible that there was no reason for Gertrude to unleash such horrors on her grandchildren, and she simply just enjoyed it? Perhaps, in her twisted logic, she chose to vent her frustrations on her grandchildren instead of her own children because it felt easier to inflict cruelty on those who weren't technically hers. The truth behind her motives remained unknown till today. However, what became painfully evident was the profound impact it had on young Anthony.
Sowell had a dysfunctional family, and the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse goes back decades.
The sinister transformation that unfolded within Anthony was chilling. After witnessing these horrifying incidents repeatedly happening within the confines of his own home over the years, a disturbing compulsion began to consume him. He felt an eerie need to partake in these grotesque acts, a distorted way of honoring his mother. But his involvement did not take the form of merely striking his nieces and nephews. It extended into something far darker and much more horrific. According to the haunting account provided by Leona Davis, her torment began at the tender age of 10, inflicted by her own uncle. What renders this chilling tale even more horrific is the revelation that Anthony wasn't the only one involved in these horrors. In fact, Leona disclosed that all of Anthony's brothers partook in similar acts, casting a dark shadow over her and her sisters throughout their childhood. The horrors inflicted on them by the Sowells left them emotionally scarred, destined to carry the weight of those actions for the rest of their lives. The veil of uncertainty hung heavily over whether Gertrude had any knowledge of this abuse. She had displayed a deeply disturbing side and an unsettling grudge against her grandchildren. It was a shocking thought, leaving the disturbing possibility that she might have encouraged her sons to engage in these heinous and violent acts.
They knew they had a monster, and they let him go. If they only had to listen to me.
The age-old question of whether someone can be inherently evil remains up for debate. But as we delve deeper into Anthony's harrowing childhood, it becomes increasingly difficult to believe that it didn't shape him in some profound way. It offers us a chilling window into the twisted perspective that may have influenced his later heinous crimes. Growing up in an environment where such terrifying acts were normalized, it's no wonder that he would go on to perpetrate similar horrors, seemingly without any guilt or shame. The roots of his wickedness ran deep, intertwined with the very fabric of his upbringing.
Let's find some dream, man. I just took my garbage out.
In 1978, at the age of 18, Anthony embarked on a new path by joining the United States Marine Corps. His service as a military electrician led him to the Carolinas from 1978 to 1979. Followed by an overseas posting at the dawn of the new decade with the 3rd Force Service Support Group. In 1984, a brief assignment took him to the Marine Corps Base Camp Butler in Okinawa, Japan, and during this period, he appeared to be a model citizen. In 1985, he finally returned to the United States with numerous commendations, including a Good Conduct Medal and 2 letters of appreciation. This seemingly clean and good journey stood in stark contrast to the sinister undercurrents lurking within him, the same darkness that would later manifest itself in scary ways. But for now, to the casual observer, Anthony presented a facade of an exemplary Marine and a seemingly upright individual. Those who crossed paths with him during his service often described him as a reserved person, and this quiet demeanor, in their eyes, was far from a cause for concern. There was no reason for them to suspect the dark, brutal acts he had inflicted upon his own family during his traumatic childhood. Anthony, with his concealed past, had no intentions of volunteering such sinister information to anyone. He thrived in the shadows, living quietly and discreetly, camouflaging his darker instincts beneath the surface. Yet, an insatiable itch clawed at him, a compulsion that had taken root during his formative years under the roof of his mother. The idea of inflicting pain upon women had become a consuming desire over the years, an appetite he couldn't suppress. It not only allowed him to vent his simmering rage on others, but also gave him a sense of power, a dark satisfaction he couldn't find through any other means. As Anthony kept these sinister cravings hidden for now, he wouldn't be able to for much longer, and the result would be devastating.
I was just feeling sad and lonely and stuff all the time. Mood swings. It was just, I can't even explain.
By 1989, a sinister transformation was taking hold as Anthony began his hunt for unwilling and unsuspecting victims. While there had been speculations of him committing these atrocities even earlier, there's no proof of that. As far as the authorities know, Anthony let go of whatever control he had in his inhibition in 1989. The identity of his first known victim remains hidden, as she wished to distance herself from any public association with him. However, the gruesome details of what transpired that night were etched into everyone's memory. For those who had known Anthony in passing, this revelation must have been a gut-wrenching shock. Yet, for his niece Leona Davis, it was an all-too-familiar horror, a dark echo of her own torment.
He met her one evening and enticed her with wanting to get high.
The accounts reveal that Anthony lured the unnamed woman during a night out, coaxing her back to his home for a few more drinks. At this point, he had begun to develop his mode of attacking women.
Anthony Sowell would lure his victims in with conversation and what I call props. Props meaning beer, crack cocaine.
Once within the confines of his home, the atmosphere swiftly changed as he bound the woman's hands and feet with a tie and belt. A rag silenced her cries for help as he subjected her to a horrifying attack, similar to the torment he had inflicted on his niece years prior. What made this incident even more horrific, if such a thing was possible, was the woman's pregnancy, which was, at the time, in its 3rd month. The fact that he would do such a thing to a pregnant woman proved that whatever shroud of humanity left in him was gone, a chilling revelation that defied all understanding. However, amid the horrors that unfolded, a faint glimmer of hope remained. The victim managed to escape and bravely report the entire ordeal to the authorities. As the first chilling chapter of Anthony's reign of terror unfolded, a community was gripped by fear and dread. Curiously, and perhaps not entirely unexpected in many parts, the police took an agonizingly long time to delve into the details of this assault. Anthony might have started feeling a dangerous sense of impunity, unaware that the wheels of investigation were slowly turning. It was during this interlude that his audacity seemed to swell, his desires unabated. A year after the initial incident, he ventured to the home of a local woman in Cleveland, invited there by her own hospitality, only to launch another horrifying attack, echoing his previous acts. Although he found himself in handcuffs by this point, the authorities encountered a formidable obstacle, convincing the woman to testify. This dilemma wasn't unusual when it came to rape victims. Fear of reprisals, the reluctance to expose the traumatic experience to the public eye, and the specter of enduring personal attacks by the attacker's defense attorney on the witness stand were all powerful deterrents. Many victims, for the sake of moving on and avoiding further trauma, opted to remain silent. Whatever the woman's reasons, it seemed like another stroke of luck for Anthony, reinforcing his belief that he could act with impunity. Yet his dream of continued freedom was about to shatter, for the police had finally amassed enough evidence to charge him for the prior attack. A trio of charges, including kidnapping, loomed over him. In his bid to evade justice, Anthony denied the initial 2 charges, asserting that the first woman had willingly returned to his apartment and that his attempts to force himself upon her had failed. However, he chose to plead guilty to one of the charges, a decision that would condemn him to spend the next 15 years behind bars within the confines of a local prison complex. The suspense heightened as the forces of justice closed in on the elusive predator.
In her mind, she is hanging out with someone that she knows. But she's met with a punch in the face, a rape, a brutal assault from which she wasn't able to escape.
Anthony would soon be released from prison after serving his full sentence. But once he got out, he was back to his horrifying behavior. This time, a whole lot worse. Anthony Sowell's first known victim in his violent murder spree was a 38-year-old woman named Crystal Dozier. A mother of 7, Dozier had started struggling with drug addiction after the death of one of her children. In May 2007, Anthony offered her drugs to lure her into his home.
Sowell tied her ankles with cable and a knotted cloth around her neck. She was choked with this.
The last few moments of her life, beyond the betrayal and the pain and just the terror of what's happening to her, have to be unreal.
For the next 2 years, the serial killer continued his reign of terror. targeting women who he didn't think would be reported missing by loved ones. Tragically, he was correct about some of his victims who weren't even known to be missing until their bodies turned up on his property, months or even years after their murders. However, many of his victims were reported missing, but the police didn't take their families seriously. After getting away with murder for 2 years, Latundra blew the case wide open, leading the investigators to what is now known as the House of Horrors. Anthony Sowell was arrested and charged with 81 counts of murder. During his trial, a lot of horrific details came to light, shocking and terrifying his neighbors. Anthony's neighbors were horrified to learn that the terrible smell they had complained about for years wasn't coming from Reyes. The owner of the shop testified about the odor at Anthony's trial. He said that he even spent over $20,000 on new plumbing fixtures, sewer lines, and grease traps in an effort to stop the stench. Still, learning about the horrifying true source of the smell led to no feelings of vindication for Cash. Other residents were appalled at the Cleveland Police Department's handling of the case. The first body recovered from Anthony Sowell's home to be identified was that of Tanya Carmichael. She had vanished in late 2008 after telling a friend that she was going to run errands. Tanya's family reported her missing to police, but officers stereotyped her as an addict and failed to follow up on leads, such as Tanya's car being found in Sowell's neighborhood. People forgot about her, Tanya's daughter Donita said. The city of Cleveland eventually paid out $1.3 million in settlements to the families of Sowell's victims for their poor handling of the case. Sowell was ultimately convicted on 81 charges, including kidnapping, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, and 11 counts of murder. During his trial, Anthony gave a statement apologizing to his victims' families.
The only thing I want to say is that I'm sorry. I know that might not sound like much, but I truly am sorry from the bottom of my heart.
But the apology did nothing to save him from the sentence that was coming. He was found guilty of all the charges and given the ultimate sentence. But before he could face the consequences of his actions, he died. In 2021, Anthony Sowell passed away from a chronic disease he battled with for 10 years. His home was demolished in 2011, and in 2021, a memorial called the Garden of 11 Angels was unveiled on the site to honor the forsaken victims of the Cleveland Strangler. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know of other similar cases? Let me know in a comment, and before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time, and stay safe.